Welcome to Leadership Mindsets with Catherine Martins. I talk to all kinds of leaders about how they think. This is a chance to broaden our ideas of leadership and hear from leaders about how they successfully inspire and motivate others on a daily basis. We will hear their stories, the joys and triumphs, and the challenges of leadership. It's my hope that we get an insight behind the scenes of how these leaders think. And as we hear their stories of choosing bravery, humility, morality, that we will all be inspired to reflect a little deeper about the way that we think too, and that we will challenge ourselves to also have healthy mindsets. My guest today is Jody Kubo from Power to Change and Kubo Coaching. Welcome, Jody.
Thank you.
And why don't you just kick us off, Jody, by telling us a bit about your roles, both in Kubo Coaching and in Power to Change. I know you've got 2 feet in 2 different camps. Where are you in leadership these days?
Yeah, I've had lots of leadership opportunities, thankfully. I will say though, I just a slight correction. It's Kubo Life Coaching.
Thanks for the help, the
No
correction.
worries, no worries. But in Power to Change, it's a global nonprofit Christian organization, and it goes by different names. But in Australia, we go by Power to Change, and within that, I am currently working in a semi-administrative role in that I am creating a coaching system for our trainings.
Mm.
Have trainings, but you know how trainings go. Oftentimes people don't use it or they get too busy, kind of fall away. And so the coaching is to help support that. I know you're a coach yourself, so you totally understand this. But for your audience, I'll just explain that. And so I'm pretty much done with that. And so now I'm gathering some people who raise their hands to be the first batch of coaches. I'm calling them mentor coaches because it's not purely life coaching style. And so I have about 7 of those. So now I'm in the training phase to get them to be more coach-like in their dealing with, bringing up people, empowering people. So that's more fun for me than the being in my office, my home office behind the desk. With Kubo Life Coaching, yeah, I launched that a couple of years ago. That was a COVID endeavor. And so I have just a few simple packages for people who are interested in that. But I have been using the coaching style, being a coaching in my ministry for many, many years, like 30 plus years, being more coach-like in that instead of kind of telling people what to do or advising, to ask questions to empower people. So those are the main things. I'm also studying professional supervision, and that will be another hat I'll wear in the future.
Yeah. Tell us, how did you get into those roles? I mean, you don't just land in leadership, do you? There's usually a whole backstory. Tell us a bit about yours.
Well, in our organization, you kind of you can't get thrown into it. So that's kind of like one of the organizational strengths is you can get into leadership quite quickly, but that can also be a weakness if you're not supported well. But yeah, I started in full time in Japan, where I have by heritage I'm Japanese, but I went over not knowing any Japanese. I was raised in California, actually, and so there's a lot of challenges there. But after the initial training, I was actually assigned to a campus. And this is a kind of a fun story, though, because a good friend of mine, he was going to be the campus team leader. His name was Tom. Shout out to Tom. And it was Tom and a girl named Kim and myself. And I was so excited because I really respected Tom. But right before the university semester was to start, Tom brought me aside and said, Jody, I'm pretty serious dating Bev. And I said, yeah. I said, well, I asked her to marry me. And I said, oh, that's great. And then he said, uh, by the way, we're going to go back to the States to get married. So congratulations. You are now the new campus leader.
Oh, you were thrown in. Yes.
And I didn't even know how to get there yet. So I'm like, what's going on? But you know, my teammates were great, and we just kind of figured it out as we went along. So that was my first
Yeah.
induction into leadership.
Oh, into leadership. Yeah. I don't think yours is an uncommon story, because
Mhm.
there's probably even some people listening who can relate to that. The boss left and they needed someone else, and all of a sudden you've got the job. I can remember my own story. One of my very first titles that had the word manager in it. I didn't even approach for a management role. I went for a job interview for a few rungs down,
Mhm.
and they gave me a call back and said, "Oh, actually, we saw you with this leadership potential. Would you like the manager's job?" And I almost fell off my chair.
Mm.
so so yeah, but I think you touched on something there in your story about the need for good support when you're a new leader,
Mhm.
and when you're in those roles where perhaps you've never done it before, how important it is to have the support around you. um, I would really like to hear a bit more about what support has been there for you along the way. Where did you get support from back then, Jody? And now too, where do you get support from now in the leadership roles that you have?
Yeah, so I've been in leadership for quite a long time, over 30 years of various leadership roles. And yeah, I would just say um, number one is, if you have a good supervisor, someone above you who can encourage you, resource you, of course, that's the best. And I work best with that situation. Some people, of course, they want less, no one wants a micromanager for sure. Nobody, and I
Yeah.
don't either. But for me, it's if someone can just kind of give me a framework and then just say, go get the job done and check up on me every once in a while, that would be like ideal. But I would say that there were many times because I worked in Japan and there were resources were quite slim. There were hardly any resources. So I had to
Mm.
really look to my teammates, my immediate teammates, my wife, and sometimes I had to just outsource. In other words, seek friends or ask people to mentor me who are overseas. So I think
Yeah.
that was a key that I learned that, sometimes, well, when I was younger, in my younger leadership days, it felt more like, gut it out, do it by yourself. But then I realized I can find what I need, possibly. Sometimes I could.
Mm.
But then it caused me to look outward and to find the support that I needed to make it happen. I think that was really important discovery.
Yeah, and now you are that kind of support for others as well, aren't you? And you've got a unique insight into the difference between an external support, whether that be in a different country or just in a different company or organization, and internal support, because you're building up the internal network within Power to Change of coaches internally, but
Mhm.
you're also doing your life coaching, which is external support. Do you want to just talk a little bit about the pros and cons then of internal versus external support?
Yeah, well, I think the internal is really the most important. And I've been around the block enough to know that you can't rely on your organization or maybe it's your company to give you that.
Mm.
So I have found that I had to, as the leader, I had to supply that. And so I learned the kind of the style. Oops, I lost my screen there. Here we go. I'm back. Of trying to find how people are motivated naturally. And this was done with me many years ago when I was challenged to be a city leader, one of the cities called Nagoya, the fourth largest city in Japan. And that was a huge one that it's like, there's no way I can do that. But a friend of mine who was my supervisor at that time recommended I do this kind of a profile thing called motivation. What is it called? Motivated abilities patterns.
Right.
And
Tell
then,
us a bit about that.
yeah, well, it was 7 stories from my background where I was successful. And then they analyzed it and they broke it down into kind of themes. And it was just so spot on. And it was so helpful for me. And it allowed me to say yes to that position. And then it turned out to be very much fitting for my personality and my character. But I thought it was so good. I thought, I think I could duplicate this, but simplify it.
Mm.
And since then, I've been doing that, and that's part of my what I do for people as a coach. And it would be as simple as me asking you, Catherine, for, you know, a story from your background where you were the star, where you were, it was your hero story.
Mm.
And I'll just talk it through with you, and take notes, ask heaps of questions, and through that, patterns will emerge where when these patterns are in place, you will naturally succeed. And since learning that, I've done that with every single one of my staff members, and I've taught them how to do it. And because we know each other's strengths that way, delegation is so much easier, and we have a greater appreciation for each other.
It sounds very empowering as well. I'm a great fan of the playing to your strengths, strengths
Mm,
finder assessments, those sorts of things,
hmm
and whatever tools someone can get their hands on that helps them understand, their innate abilities that they bring.
hmm
Um, because we spend a lot of time trying to do training and get our weaknesses built up and those sorts of things when we could be focusing rather on developing our strengths. And so when you do that, which is a lot of what sounds like you've described, you then also feel greater sense of confidence. It makes you more brave
hmm
and more willing to step up and take responsibility because you know where you can succeed and do well. It doesn't mean to say we ignore our weaknesses. Of course, we then might need to build a team around us for, filling in those gaps.
hmm
But, I love what the sound of what you were talking about there, in terms of it being an empowering and a strengths focused process. Have I got that right?
Totally, totally. It's not about finding the weaknesses, because everyone immediately wants to say, "Oh, I'm really bad at this, and this is I need to
Yeah.
build this." But it focuses on the strengths. But I think the key is there's true, real stories, and
Yeah.
we're just made up of stories. That's what we are. And when we can highlight those, it's locked in our memories. That's why it immediately comes to mind if I ask, tell me a story about yourself where you were, did great. Most people, it just immediately something pops up, sports related or school club or something. And then when they can share those stories with their teammates, again, it's stories, it's who I am. It's not like a computer generated printout of what it tells me
Yeah.
I'm good at. So that's another strength of it, I think.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing about that. So my next question for you, Jody,
Mhm.
is a bit more about these assessments you're doing with people, but more taking that exploration to the variety of people. So when you do those interviews and those assessments, I'm sure you've experienced such a wide variety of personalities, strengths.
hmm
When someone's a leader, often their team has in it a whole bunch of those, and they're not always on the same wavelength with you as the leader.
hmm
Have you got any, wisdom, stories, insights you can share about how a leader manages such a variety of personalities within their team?
Well, yeah, and I've had many different teams throughout my life, and all of them have been multicultural as well.
That adds
Japan,
a whole other element on
yes.
top too, doesn't it?
When I was in Japan, so obviously Japanese, but then there were Americans, there's Singaporeans, Koreans. And so each one comes in not only as a different individual, but they come in with a different culture as well. And for me, it's always about, I just want to meet with people, meet with my team, as I said, with the motivated patterns, hear their stories. What are
Mm,
they good at? What are they motivated naturally to do? And if I can know my people well, then I can delegate according to their strengths. And when that happens, of course, if you're, for example, if you're an employee or a staff person and your boss, you feel that your boss knows you and therefore delegates to you, and even in front of the team, say, you know what, I would maybe normally do this, but Sally, she can just knock this out of the park. I'm going to give it to her. It's everything is empowering. It empowers the entire team. And so when the team knows that, for example, if I was leader, is for them and not about, building myself up, but it's for the team wins, it just builds up morale as well.
Mm.
So I think that's something that I've always seen in my teams, thankfully, that have been, high performance teams.
Yes, you've been privileged to have that. But I'm suspecting that you've also created that by the way that you've led. Because if there is that high morale that you talked about, then that also means you've probably got less turnover. People are happy to work for you as the leader when that morale is being fostered and when they feel validated and heard.
Mm.
And then it lifts the team to a place of high performance.
That's absolutely correct. And of course, I'm
Yeah.
not perfect. And I've made my mistakes. I've had difficulties on teams as well. I've had to admit so many times
We all have.
what I've stuffed up. However, I will say in my previous role to what I'm doing now, as starting international student ministry in Sydney.
Yeah.
I've been doing that for about 10 years, but then I passed off leadership. But one of my leaders, he told me, he said, you know what, Jody, um, we're the only area where we've gained new workers and people aren't leaving. The attrition rate is just so minimal. People want to stay. And I thought, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that's true. And so that is one of the biggest, you know, kind of when you feel like a leader as far as satisfaction, that's one of a
Yeah.
huge
Yeah, that's
satisfying
huge
compliment.
affirmation or
Yeah.
confirmation of your healthy leadership, that people actually want to stay. So
Mm.
well done. I guess that's definitely worth, those moments are when you want to pat yourself on the back. Because knowing when you're doing well as a leader, I guess, is one of the biggest challenges, isn't it? I mean, you can look at, let's say you're running a business or a ministry, we can look at numbers, but there's so much more to it, isn't it? And I think, yeah, lack of attrition or um, like less turnover, if you want to use that kind of more corporate word,
Mhm.
that's another measurement. That's like a hard number we can look at.
And that's so true. And I think there's a lot of people in leadership, they looking for the bottom line first, that number. But in reality, if you have a healthy team, that number is going to appear, and it's going to be there. I mean, that's not guaranteed, of course, but if you have healthy teams, that's the result. But if you're looking at the number first, then you're going to probably sacrifice your teams, and that's
Yes,
no good.
yes.
Mhm.
So what I'm hearing is the number will naturally fall out, or the numbers will naturally happen if you're focused on the people and making sure that they are, um, you know, being respected, being heard, being empowered,
Mhm.
and performing well.
Exactly.
The numbers will line themselves up. Yeah, I
I
love
believe
that.
so. Yes.
That's great. That's
Mhm.
great. Right. I'm sure in the 30 odd years that you've been in leadership, there have been some times when you've had challenges, maybe projects have just even completely fallen over, things have might have imploded. I don't know. Tell us some of your stories, and especially how have you coped? Have you got any tips of resilience in the midst of those stories for the rest of us listening and learning about leadership?
Well, fortunately, I haven't killed anyone yet.
Yay.
Um, yeah, of course, especially I think when you're in like an entrepreneurial mindset, um,
Yeah.
you're always trying new things, just constantly trying new things. So number one, I think, uh, in coaching, we say there's no failure, only feedback. And I think
Mm.
if you have that mindset, that right there, that's a huge help. Another one is a sense of humor. Thankfully, I've been blessed with a sense of humor. Some would say a very warped one, and I can laugh at almost anything. But there are times, of course, when it's not a laughing matter, and things are just stressful.
Mm.
COVID showed us that. Yeah, I've had doubt, sometimes bouts of anxiety and even depression sometimes because of work-related stresses and traumas. So yeah, what do you do? Well, number one, I think having a good friend or a couple of good friends. Now, people who are extrovert, introvert, we can go into that, but there's no time for that. But I think if you have a real close go-to person that you can talk to for anything. Now, if if you're a church goer, maybe it could be your pastor or somebody, a leader there. It doesn't have to be a leader at all, but someone that you can be real with in a non-judgmental environment, I think is super key.
Can I
Uh,
butt in there and say some of the best friends are the ones that don't leap into giving advice? They
yes,
just some friendships that are like that, that just ask the questions, just take the time to listen, can be as good as a counselor at times.
totally.
You just need to debrief.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
and I'm also a big fan of even being selective about those
Hmm.
friendships, because those ones that do want to just jump in and give you advice maybe aren't the ones you need in those really difficult moments when you just need to process it.
Oh yeah. Oh,
That's just my two bits worth, but you
oh,
continue your story.
I think you speak for the whole world because what if someone starts giving me advice then that's immediately filter them out for that segment of my need. I think the other thing is just trying to get away. I like to get, sometimes I'll take like personal retreats just to get away, at least 2 nights away somewhere. I would go to the Blue Mountains or
Nice.
beach. I have, Manly is a favorite place. And just to get away and clear my head, I journal a lot. Journaling,
Yeah.
I think is very good for help for resilience and reflection.
Yeah.
I am a Christian as well, so prayer is always there. And I'm not talking about, you got to spend certain X amount of minutes on your knees and do this kind of rote stuff, but just having a conversation with God.
Mm,
Often I'm just like, Lord, I, it feels terrible. Just help me through this day. Help me through
mm.
what's going on. Give me wisdom. And yeah, that's always extremely helpful. Um, what else can I say? I think, learning about how others have coped and gone through things. I really like inspiring stories. So if you look at my Netflix, list,
Yeah.
it will be about, biographies and documentaries. I like real stories of real people who have done, amazing things and have come back from adversity. Fiction, whatever.
Oh,
I'm not into too much superhero stuff because it's fiction. But when you hear real people doing amazing things through their circumstances and coming, out of the fire, I think, wow, it's just inspiring to me and it helps me to keep going.
yeah, yeah. And those amazing triumphs are happening every day. And it's a
Mhm.
lot of actually my motivation for this whole program.
Mm.
It's because there's leaders like you who are out there triumphing every day and maybe not even realize that's actually what they're doing and that's what's happening. You may not even be realizing that you're in leadership just by the very fact that you have a small team in a retail shop or the kids' church or whatever. But actually, you are overcoming all the obstacles of leading every day by doing that. And I just really want to encourage and empower all of those out there that are in leadership at all levels. Sometimes we only see in the media or we only, read about the people who are in high levels of leadership, but there's leadership happening all over the place, all the time, at all sorts of levels. And it's lovely to hear your modes, I guess, of helping deal with the stress, because that stress is very real, no matter what level of leadership you're in. And we all needed to hear some of those. So thank you. And Jody, I wanted to ask you one last question today, which was about who's influenced how you think,
Mm.
because we've heard some really great ways of dealing with stress, ways of building up and empowering your team, We heard some, wealth of experience there in terms of leadership. There has to be some people along the way who have influenced the way you think to enable you to do all of that. Can you tell us a bit about them?
Sure. Yeah. Well, you kind of prepped me with this, so I wrote a list, but I have three people that I'll bring to the audience. One was when I was a uni student, and I became a Christian in university. That's a whole story in itself because I didn't want to. I was running away from religion and God and all that, and very skeptical. But anyway, I couldn't deny it anymore, and I did it. And it actually was life-changing. It was quite amazing. But the university that I was at, the team leader of this organization, and his name was Don Wilcox, he and his wife, I was just in awe of how they led because it was just, I don't know, it was so effortless and empowering. And he was a sports person, and so he was a coach. And now I had no concept of that as far as life coaching principles or whatever. But as I look back, he was a coach, and he just coached us, and he was humble, and he allowed people. He could have done all these things so well, but he was always letting the younger people take the lead, and he was encouraging and empowering. So yeah, hats off to Donnie Wilcox, number one. I have heaps of others. I'm leaving out just so many people. I would say though, in the Bible, Nehemiah. Um, some people that have never heard that name, but he was a super leader, and he led by example. A lot of my leadership follows him because I am more entrepreneurial, always pioneering new things. And that's what he did. He went to investigate the situation, which was the city was in shambles. His job was to rebuild the walls, rebuild the city. And just these principles, just one after that, as you read it, I would encourage anyone who hasn't read the book of Nehemiah to read it and look at these leadership principles. But I learned so much from Nehemiah. Lastly, I would say, and this one is he's a Japanese. He was a military commander. What actually is a colonel, I think. I forget his rank, but in World War II. And towards the end of the war, when they kind of want to get rid of certain people, they'd send them to these islands to basically, win for the country. But it was kind of code word for die valiantly because it's hopeless. There's no way. We're not sending you any help. And so this guy Tadamichi Kuribayashi, he was a independent thinker, because in Japan it's very much groupthink, and everyone did the same thing. But he was so innovative, and he had the courage to do things according to what would work, not according to what his leaders wanted him to do. He had to fight every way to do things his way. And he was the leader at the Battle of Iwo Jima. Maybe you've heard of that. But the US was supposed to just kind of clean up this island within 4 days, they said. It lasted for 4 months. It's one of the hardest fought battles of World War II, and it's because of his leadership. So I highly respect him because he had the guts and courage to do things according to what would work and according to his, what would be the best for his men. He cared for his men. He didn't want them just yell banzai and jump out of the rocks and die, because that was the common practice back then. Just yell, scream banzai and die for the emperor. But he said, no, nobody dies needlessly. We're going to fight to the end. So the U.S., the soldiers, they had the highest respect for him, and they still do.
Yeah, I mean, there's really strong theme there of courage to go against the flow, to take a new direction that not even the leaders were suggesting, of bravery, but also of the care. I really was hearing there his desire to care for those that were under him, And that's not something we hear a lot about when it comes to leadership. But actually, it's probably one of the keys, wouldn't you say? That it's not just about being in charge and doing the directing of people, but it's actually looking after them.
Definitely. And I think that's the theme. Like I think of Donnie and Muriel, that's who they were. I look at Nehemiah. It was all about caring for his people and making sure they were cared for and that they had the tools and the resources to get the job done.
Yeah.
Of course,
Yeah.
Jesus was the leader of leaders, and his whole thing was about leading his sheep. He was known as the good shepherd. And so I think the concept of servant leadership has gone into the corporate world as well, but I think it's a lot of times it's more on paper and not necessarily modeled. But if you can model it sincerely, you'll see that your people will respond. And if
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you're for them, they'll work harder.
Yeah. Well, what a great point to finish up on. And always feel like we could keep going on, but we do need to finish up. Thank you so much, Jody, for coming on the program today. And I do hope that we can have you on again another time soon.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
My pleasure. Are there any final tips or thoughts before we finish up that you were kind of hoping you might get out, but I didn't ask about?
Well, I'll just leave with this. I just think with anything, um, start small to win big. That's one of the things I like to say, because sometimes we try to reach for the moon and it's too soon and then we just crash and burn. Better
Yeah.
to start small, see small wins, and then build on the small wins to win big.
Well, that sounds great. Thanks again. All right. Well, thanks everyone too for tuning in to Leadership Mindsets with Catherine Martins. Until next time, dig deep, challenge yourself, and choose a healthy mindset. Bye for now.